All right, today I'm sitting with Keith Ward. Now, Keith has had interests in over 30 businesses in New Zealand, nationwide, and trans-Tasman. And so for business owners, that's kind of the goal of being a business is to thrive. And so I'm not going to summarise it anymore because I'll butcher it, but I want to take the time to thank you, Keith, for taking the time to sit with me.
No problem.
And can you start off by giving us a background on your relationship with business?
Right, well, it's a long time since I started my first business at 21, and the reason I did was because my parents had always talked about buying a bread run or milk run, this is in the olden days, opening a florist shop. My mum was a florist, but they never did, because mum was one of those lucky 1950 brides that had 5 children under 6, so not surprisingly, weren't in this position to take a risk, because they would have lost everything with so many young kids, and of course it was single income families in those days. So that sort of planted seeds in my mind, and even though I went to university and did a BMS at Waikato, I really just went out my own and started my own little commercial sales, door-to-door salesman, sort of commercial traveller business when I was 20, 21. And I read a lot of books. People called them American positive mental attitude books in a negative way in those days, in my 20s, but I read really great stuff that sort of resonated with me and stuck in my mind and gave me more confidence than maybe some of my mates, and also taught me things that I didn't learn at school and my parents didn't tell me. And it's one of the ironies in life. You can go to a library and everybody goes to the library and they get out cookbooks or how to make your garden great. But there's actually books in there on how to retire a millionaire at 40 that hardly anybody ever takes out, but they work because the people who wrote them did it. So I read that stuff, and that sort of just set me up to take entrepreneurial risks, is how I'd put it, from an early age. And then, I had a whole lot of businesses, and to be fair, with hindsight, I was really lucky. I was hitting with hindsight, I was really lucky. I was hitting 1,000, using the softball batting term from America, in 25 years. Not a single business that I started had any problems. So I just had a golden stretch through the 80s and 90s.
And that's quite a turbulent time as well.
Well, it was, but you see, the first thing I learned, because I was poor, okay, I came from a poor family, and when I started university I was poor, and when I left I was still poor. I really learned through reading that cash flow was absolutely the king. It still is now. But I focused on cash flow, not assets. And so therefore, even though there were ups and downs, because I was cash flow strong, I could ride them. I could ride competitor attacks. So one of my businesses had an sales attack from an international, in fact a publicly listed Australian company, and we were able to deflect their price discounting because we had strong cash flow, and we were able to match it and not lose market share, whereas they thought they'd put us under by taking $2,000 off an $8,995 product I was selling. So I think cash flow is king is still a truism. Well, it's true. It's been true forever, but it's more pronounced now because we've been through some challenging times with COVID and cyclones and just stuff. So the common theme I had through all those great years was cash flow was king, and I just focused on that and that virtually alone. I mean, I did sales and marketing and all those other good things because I did a marketing major at university, but cash flow was just absolutely critical, and everything flows from that.
Yes, and we see that actually from my side of things. Businesses who manage that well versus businesses that are using kind of the business like an ATM and have less discipline with regard to the cash flow. It could be 2 cafes or 2 engineering businesses, but how you prioritise that, essentially it's the lifeblood of your business.
Absolutely. And I mean, so you're in business loan financing effectively, and you're a banker. So the first thing I'd imagine you look at is serviceability and cash flow, because how are you going to get your money back?
That's right. What are you doing with it once it hits your account?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I did do a little period of angel investing, and I just thought of that then ironically because one of the peers I was working alongside, he said, "Keith, you're not an angel investor, you're just an angel." I says, "What's that?" He says, "You're not doing proper due diligence on the investments you're doing. You're just giving 50 grand." And I went, "Oh, okay."
What a guy to know.
Well, he told me a little bit too late because I lost a bit of money. For instance, the Breakers. The Breakers is a business that I started with Michael Redman and Dallas Fisher, who were business colleagues from the Waikato. I was living in Cambridge, they were in Hamilton. It's part of my third rib. It is something I'm just incredibly proud of being the founder of. I'm just passionate about it. We started it to put a smile on people's faces, not to make money. It was actually a secondary benefit to try and, be cash flow positive. It wouldn't surprise you to know that having signed a contract with the Aussies, there are a few fishhooks in it that we didn't quite really reconcile at the outset that came and bit us on the bum. But the reality is that we lost money on the investment, and so after the third year we really couldn't put our hand in our pocket for another six-figure sum and suit up, so we managed the transition seamlessly to Paul and Liz Blackwell, who took it on to 4 National League titles, ANBL titles that is. But it's still something I'm very passionate about, so the fact that I did lose money on it, which is possibly because I didn't do enough due diligence like that guy said, sort of is okay, because I just love the beast we created, the thing it's become, and how much it's inspired people and how much joy it brings to people, even though it didn't quite work out for me financially. So that's just, and it was all cash, we had no debt, so it was a philanthropic gift, and it's still something I'm really delighted about, even though I should have probably a little bit more financial scar tissue,
Well, I think with those mistakes, those financial mistakes, so long as they're not repeated, then you could consider it an investment in your life MBA.
Because it had such a golden run, they said it's Mother Nature reverting to kind, or it's the averages kicking in. So you had all this glorious stuff, and you need a couple of hits to get down to being average. That's the tall poppy thing we get in New Zealand. So, I mean, it's been a blast. And to be fair, some of the business I shouldn't have sold. I should have just appointed management and kept them, because I'd done the hard work of getting them up. But in 96, 97, my wife got diagnosed with cancer, so we sold up basically everything, retired and went home and just looked after her for 5 years. But unfortunately, she didn't make it. So after being a solo dad with my teenage kids, I then got back on the entrepreneurial horse. But one of the things I always thought about Elsa, my wife, was that she was my compass. And I'd take her to meet people I was going to do business with, and if she didn't sense that they were good people, she'd just say, well, no, maybe not. And without her, I didn't quite have that, compass, and I did make a couple of blues, but that's just life, isn't it? It can't be perfect. Life is unfair, and I found out in the years after she died how unfair it was. So that's just the cut and thrust of life.
I just want to pause there for emphasis. That's really a lot.
Well, I've had a busy life. I've had a lot of stuff happen to me. Good, and mostly. I mean, I've got great children, great grandchildren. I've got a great wife now. But in the meantime, life is unfair. Just accept that as a truism. And I had a glorious run for 25 years, and then I had a few hiccups, but it just gives me more experience. And when I talked to you the other day about business and life and how they intertwine, it really just reminded me the exciting, slightly roller coasterish, whatever that word is, like a roller coaster, life that I've had. And to be fair, while there's something, I mean, I'd rather have a bit more of my own money back, but I'm really enjoying what I do now. I've now become a qualified financial advisor. I just love helping people achieve their business goals, set up their vision, their dreams, and then transmorph that into how they're actually going to do the planning. I still support, philanthropic sports. I'm on the New Zealand men's and mixed netball board in charge of sort of fundraising, go figure. go to Toastmasters and BNI and all that stuff, you know, and it's fun. But really the financial advice stuff I do now in business or investments, property, stock shares, KiwiSaver, it can make such a big difference to people's lives if they just understood a little bit more about it and were a little bit more knowledgeable, because we don't teach this stuff at school. And if you didn't read a lot like I did, then you sort of just drift into life, get a job, do what your mum and dad say, what your friends say, sometimes what your bank manager tells you to do, for heaven's sake. And then, you know, it's just, there's not the discipline of a plan that can get you places. It's a bit more haphazard, and maybe that's a New Zealand thing, but I like plans and structures and knowing where I'm going before I start the journey. And in business, I think that's, well, and life, personally life, but the most important thing.
Well, there's two things that you've touched on that I think are worth expanding on. And one of them is the personal development. You know, being open to new information, reading books, and then thinking critically about whether or not it's applicable and what you're going to use for your own development. And the other is advisors, and you referred to your wife as a compass. And some people that I work with, I see, are either too proud or uninformed to pull people in, and actually choosing the right people for that opinion as well. But those two things, being open to new information, whether it's from further development or from proper advisors, they can actually propel you so much further than that Kiwi can do number 8 wire attitude of I can just do it myself.
She'll be right.
She'll be right. And it's a form of leverage, isn't it, by using other people's knowledge and skills for your own benefit. So there's lots of different reasons that people go into business, and one of them is to set yourself up for retirement, to create lifestyle opportunities. And so how do you prepare to exit your business and actually to have that payday?
Well, one, you've got to plan for it from the start, ideally. But say you didn't. You've got the successful business, and you know, you might be making $600,000 a year. You might be making $120,000 a year. It's whatever success means to you in cash flow terms, or in profit I'm talking about now. Often, if you didn't have a plan like we've sort of detailed before, you are the business. You know, or maybe you've got a really great right-hand lady who runs the office, or you know, you've got a really great foreman, technician. So there's probably 3 of you maybe running the business, and say you've got a team of 5, 8, 10, 50, whatever. And most times you haven't bothered to document all the procedures. Sometimes you do, because there's legal requirements to do so for certain things. Going onto this site, you've got to do site safe and yada yada. But often the actual way the business operates and your contacts and the sort of the USP, the actual advantage you have in your local community or city or wherever, is just you, because you started it from scratch. So if you haven't had a exit strategy in mind, you've really got to spend, and it can take a year, because you're running the business as well, to document everything down and like a franchise. The reason McDonald's sell their franchises for so much straight off the bat is they've got everything written down, and you don't need to think. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, you don't do anything. So you need to take sort of a franchise lens to your own business and start putting stuff down, and you think, if I wasn't here, so when you go away on holiday, say take a trip to Hawaii, well, the girl in the office and the foreman run the business. Yeah, but they have a lot of IP in their heads too. You might have taught it to them. But if all 3 of you weren't there, could the business function? And if there's a probability that no, then you need to sit down and document the things that you all know collectively into a series of, you know, operation manuals. And I know when you say that, people roll their eyes up and think, oh. But the point of making that, you might get 100%, 200% more money for your business if it's documented, so that you can give it to a business broker and he can show it to someone and they go, oh yeah, well, I'm not a plumber, but I could buy this as a passive investment, put a manager in charge of it who knows the industry, and have them just follow these procedures, and I'd be confident that I'm going to get a yield, a return off it. And you know, quite a few people as they age, maybe when they get 50, 60, they're thinking of selling a business because they want to get that payday, but there's other people who are looking to buy businesses to get more payday. In other words, they buy them as a passive investment. So one of the businesses I started has been bought by a, what do they call them? Wait for the truck to go. One of the businesses I started in the 80s has been ultimately bought by a high flyer, and
There's the intersection.
yeah, today, where's the bank robbery?
I heard you filming. No, this route.
There are people who are in their 50s and 60s looking to sell their businesses to get the big payday, but there's also, you know, investors, entrepreneurial type investors who are quite well off, who are looking to add businesses to their portfolio as a passive income stream. You know, and one of my first business I started in the mid 80s is now owned by a medium-sized rich lister, and he's not working in it. You know, he's just appointed a mate to be CEO, and he's running it, and it's still running the same way I built it and designed it, and it's in the same industry. It hasn't diversified. It's just making plenty in there. You know, so the value comes if you have stuff written down, you have plans, marketing plans, you have an HR plan, you have an accounting function delineated, you have an operations manual. You know, you have and your accountant can help a lot with this, but many cases you need a business advisor who knows how to knock a business advisor or a business broker who knows how to knock it together to be a presentable package for a person who's looking to buy something as an investment. No different than buying an investment property. You want, you know, information, you want yield, you want to know its growth prospects. It's the same for buying a small business. So really, it's imperative that you get that stuff from out here into some stuff, you know, into a whole lot of these, and the value, honestly, you can get 100-200% more than if you just try to sell it as it's running and as it's operating. If it takes you a year to do that, no worries. You know, the return is massive. So that's the golden handshake at the end. And if you don't do that, you don't have a succession plan, you can get a vastly diluted value for the cash flow business that you've built over, you know, 20 or 30 years.
And if you plan soon enough, you can put things in place to present the business the way that you know that it is. That's what I've seen, where someone's got this vision of what they feel their business is worth, but they've been putting personal costs through and dragging their taxable income down, or they've been letting their friends have things like cheap rent or whatever it is. Really, if you're planning sooner, you can tidy all that stuff up. It may cost you more in the short term with, you know, higher taxable income and all those things, but it's looking ship-shape. It's easier to fund because it's clear and understandable, and what you know of your business makes sense on paper as well. You know, we see hospitality venues who say, this is what the books say, and this is what we actually earn, and you can't sell that because if it's not on paper, it doesn't exist.
No, besides the minor fact that it's tax evasion.
Well, yeah, that's not my area of expertise.
Cashy businesses are fine if you don't get caught. Don't.
Not financial advice. We need a disclaimer on that one. And have you seen any worst case scenarios for exiting?
Well, the worst case scenario is unfortunately death. So the hubby has a heart attack at work, and the wife, who may have worked in the business 10 years ago but doesn't anymore, is possibly underinsured, sells the business as is, really, to you know, a competitor down the road. And to be frank, I'm not over-gilding the lily. I've seen that at least 4 times. So insurance is actually an important part of owning a business, particularly if there's key people in it, 1 or 2, because if you have, for instance, traditional key man insurance, and say it was, and this is, I'll give you a case study with no names, the person died, they had $1 million of insurance, it went to the partner, the business partner, the purpose of the insurance was for him to pay out the wife the value of the business.
Yes.
There was one document never done, which was the assignment, or the I think assignment might be the wrong word, the requirement that the receiver of the insurance policy did use it for that purpose. So he kept the money.
And
He kept the $1 million, and the business folded, but he had $1 million. So, so the widow was shafted, in a word, and the intention was there, but somebody, a lawyer or the partner who was dying, didn't make sure that, and I've forgotten the word for it, but that letter that said this was I think it's a deed, that the purpose of this is that this money will be used to buy the shares at fair market value within a short period after my death. That piece of paper was missing. So the insurer, the beneficiary of the insurance policy, got it. It was in their name and they kept it. So that's probably the most worst case scenario I've ever heard of.
That's really devastating, and I suppose that's a nice thread that ties all the way back to the start of the conversation, which is planning advisors.
Yep. And yeah, that's right. So in that case, they did the insurance, but they didn't get the lawyer to tie it together and check it. And I'm not blaming the lawyer, by the way. I think it was a lack between the two to just finalise it. And I think there might have been a reluctance to finalise it by the second party when he found out the first party had terminal cancer. So that's a really sad and quite, disgusting story, to be honest. But life's unfair, so, I can't put myself in that person's shoes. There might have been other reasons. I just have no knowledge other than the overview of that. I mean, I lost my wife when I was 45. I mean, she was 44, she got cancer at 39. Life's unfair. You just got to, and the second to last thing she said to me was, make sure you keep having fun. And 5 months later, I invested in the breakers because I felt that she had spoken to me and this seemed like a really fun thing to do. Now, it lost me a whole lot of money, but it was still fun. So you just have to take your knocks and get up and move on, in business and in life. So one of the things we touched on before was just about starting businesses. And I guess I always started a business after doing quite a bit of research and planning. But again, I mentioned earlier, I read a lot, and one of the books I read early on in my life was called The E-Myth Revisited by an author called Michael Gerber. And the E stands for the word entrepreneur. So he maintains that the myth is that entrepreneurs start businesses, because that's what people think. And I was the exception of the rule. I was an entrepreneur that started businesses, but most businesses are started by the other two classes of people, which is a technician and a manager. So i.e. a electrician will start an electrical business, and a plumber will start a plumbing business, and a bloke who works for, I don't know, a manager for AMP will go and leave and become an insurance broker. So they're managers or technicians, not entrepreneurs. So they're managers and technicians, not entrepreneurs. So the challenge in a business, if you think of a bar stool, it's got 3 legs. So that's technician, manager, and entrepreneur. If you're on a bar stool with only 1 leg, say you're the technician, you'll fall off pretty quickly. It's wobbly, very hard to do. I've been in a few bars, So 2-legged bar stool, more secure, but still wobbly. So if you're a technician and a manager, and most people are 1.5 of the 3, then you'll do okay, but you'll be missing the marketing, entrepreneurial, or maybe the visionary planning step. So basically, if you start a business, or before you start a business, you should figure out which you are, and the other missing components you must outsource or hire. If you can't afford to hire, you've got to outsource maybe 1.5 of them. Maybe outsource your marketing, and so you've got to have advisors around you that are not you. If you can't afford to put them on wages, then you've got to pay them a professional fee, and then that is essential, in my view, to setting your business up for success as opposed to the random failure. And you and I both know there's plenty of people in business that wake up every morning, and in my case have a shave, in your case put on some lipstick, look in the mirror and go, that person's a hard ass to work for. You know, it's just that's what happens. It grinds them down. I mean, do you find that with the people you're in contact with?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes down to either choosing not to bring your advisors in early enough, or not knowing who to bring in and how. And I think that's part of the purpose behind this content series, is to educate these people, because, as you've mentioned, many people in New Zealand that contribute to the failed statistics of businesses are the technician who super passionate about their product or service. They go out, they hit the market and say, you know, I've been working for this guy for 10 years and I can make money if I do it myself, but the other pieces, they're either not providing the skill set themselves, or they're not hiring an accountant, as a basic example. And so they're reducing their ability to use that leverage of other people's skills.
And the danger is, if they do quite well, they don't quite understand that success can deplete their cash flow, because their working capital gets blown because all their debts rise and they don't collect them fast enough.
Yes.
And suddenly they're successful but broke, which is, you know, a real oxymoron.
Yes, speaking particularly to you in the trades.
Yeah.
I see they go, I'm going on the tools, and then we've got to factor in all the various taxes and all the various...
And staff, if they and so then they've got to manage staff, and they might be a terrific plumber, but maybe they're not so good at managing people. So these are challenges, and we see them in our respective fields all the time. So I think it's essential that you plan, and you know, I've done, I don't know, 60 plans on businesses in 30 or 40 years, and the majority of them were very successful. I had a couple of big downers, but having advisors, and that's what I find now with COVID and the vulnerability that's brought to a lot of us, and now the cyclones, heavens forbid, we're just having a bad few years run. People are feeling vulnerable. They might have been really sweet and secure in 2018. They had their retirement and their business and everything was all just, you know, tickety-boo. But things have come along and created hiccups, and now they're vulnerable and they actually need advice. And that, be frank, that's why I moved into this field and did my exams in COVID, because I could see the need. I just thought this is something I'd really like to help people with. What other things do you find from your experience when you're looking at businesses to advance loans?
One mistake I think people make is assuming that you're going to self-fund it from the cash flow of your business. And I think you've touched on planning, which if you've done your planning well enough up front, you've done your research for the market, you've done your costings for your pricing, and making sure that you're, you know, earning enough to pay for the product and pay yourself, as well as staying competitive. There's a huge amount of work before you hit the go button. But we see people who, they go, well, I'm gonna get up running, and I'm gonna earn this much a month, and that's how I'm gonna fund everything, and that's how I'm gonna pay myself, and that's how I'm gonna repay the costs and bills. And that's just such bad planning. And that comes down to what we've already touched on, which is the planning and the research, and having quality conversations with advisors. And that's, you know, the bootstrapping we were talking about before, about people trying to, you know, cut corners and defer pain of the cost of something, when really, if you're not in great shape to pay for it to get started, then you're probably not ready. That's
So what's your advice to people if they sense failure coming? Should they prepare for it in advance? Like, they should have a plan B? Because here's plan A, we're going to go this and we're going to conquer the world. They probably don't have a plan B because they don't like to think negatively, but really it's essential to look at some worst case scenarios to try and mitigate your risk, say against liabilities against your personal house, for an example. That often happens with people in business.
Yes, absolutely. And when you're in the crux of a tough decision, you're probably really emotional. And so having that framework ready when you're starting out, hoping for the best and planning for the worst, when everything's rational, you've got time to put things in place. It's far better than being in the middle of debtors chasing you, creditors chasing you,
You're
invoices.
chasing the debtors.
That's everything's crazy, then you're trying to react, and that's the worst time. Putting things in place early, again, talk to your accountant. The sooner that you plan for failure, the sooner you can protect yourself from it.
So if there's one thing I'd leave you with is, if you don't have a cash flow management plan before you open the business first day, you're in trouble already and you don't know it. And I, I did cash flow management from the beginning because I was actually, like you said, I had no money. I was actually $5,000 in debt on a credit card when I started my first business. So I just focused on cash flow because I just had to have it. And fortunately, the things I did and the initiatives I did and frankly, an enormous amount of hard work got me through. But after that first time, never again. It was just too risky.
And that's probably the exception, that example.
Yeah, that's right,
you know.
yeah. So one of the things we were just talking about in starting a business, I forgot to mention about the two other components you should really plan before you start, which is scaling and exiting.
Yes.
So the E-Myth Revisited, the book I mentioned earlier, says that you need to know how you're going to sell the business before you start it, which is a great challenge for many people because, well, they don't know, you know, and many traditional SMEs, small and medium enterprises in New Zealand, have all the IP in the head of the owner, so they don't have operations manuals, they don't have the things. So when you go to have somebody who's looking to buy a business, and when the IP walks out of the door with the owner, what's the value of the business? Well, it's depreciated because the IP is not transferable unless there's an earn out by the owner or something like that. So I think scaling and exiting you just must do at the beginning. So for instance, when I bought the Recycle Boutique, which was a business I bought, I didn't start. It had 2 stores in Derby Street and K Road in Auckland. I just loved the business model. I fell in love with it in about 15 minutes. I just thought this is a real goer. And there was a secret sauce within the business model that I can't disclose, and to do with its structure and how its margins are operated. But so I just knew that it would scale really well internationally. You know, New Zealand first, obviously, Australia, and then beyond, and particularly in Wellington and Melbourne, which, you know, are rag trade sort of towns, cities, and I just knew they would really relate to the sustainability model, the fact that they could get near new clothes for not a new price, but there was also a secret sauce and an actual business inside I can't disclose that just really made it an absolute goer. And if you think about it, people buy clothes all the time, but in recessions they go to their wardrobe and get out a hunk of clothes and go and cash them in to get some loot, and that's what we provided as a vehicle. And that's the business. I mean, I sold that business to my partners a few years after starting it, and it's actually the one I regret most, not only now because it's gone on to exactly follow the business plan I made, and our exit strategy then was to sell to a large company like a private equity company. We wanted to be big enough that it would be, you know, making, you know, $5 million a year, $8 million a year profit, and therefore to attract some. We thought an Aussie private equity company would be perfect, and that hasn't come to that fruition yet. I don't own it. It might happen in a few years, you know, because they're still building. But yeah, just a tremendously great model. So scaling and maybe having the courage or the confidence to do that. But if you haven't had the things we talked about at the beginning, the advisors, the plan, then you're unlikely to do it unless it's just by accident, because you have to actually. When you have an exit strategy here, so here you are, here you're starting, here's where you're going to go, you have a very clearly defined path. Whereas if you don't know where you're going to go, you'll go like this. You know, it's all over the place. So while if you have a clearly defined path, there might be hiccups. I call them train stations. You have to get off for a moment and then get back on the train track. But you'll still get to your destination, even if it's slightly different than you originally envisaged. Without a destination, without a goal, without an exit strategy, without a ability to scale to get to those numbers and take home, you know, intergenerational wealth is really what I'm talking about for your retirement and your family, which is why you work in business. It's not meant to be a job. Then I just feel that many people aren't optimising their potential. And you think of New Zealand companies that have done well, they have to go overseas to get their money or get their investment, and it's because I just think we don't seem to think big enough, and maybe the banks don't support us financially like other organisations in the world do. We're just a reasonably conservative, financially set up country, and maybe that squashes our entrepreneurialism, or the people who are doing it just don't have enough faith and courage and belief to see themselves having a nationwide brand, say, to start with. You know, they're just going to be a plumber in Onehunga.
Yes.
You know, I wish they'd think bigger.
Well, I think to an extent, again, it depends on who you're surrounding yourself with. If you're getting your feedback about your ideas from, you know,
Your mates
Aunt
at the rugby
Laura
club.
around the barbecue or something, who goes, oh, that's risky, or, you know, it depends on where you're getting your energy from. If you've
Yes.
got the right people around you who are fueling that drive and who support you to see the risks and go anyway, you're going to get a different outcome than having to drag these negative people along with you. So a mindset comes a long way. But what you were talking about is a good segue to one of the questions I had for you, which is, you know, why does scaling hurt?
Why does it hurt? Well,
Or when does it hurt?
yeah. Well, it hurts when it doesn't work. I mean, you have... Sorry for that truck to go. It doesn't work. You can have false starts, but again, that's what I call my train stops.
Yes.
Here's my track, here's my plan, here's where I'm going to go. Now things will come along and smack me, and you'll fall over and you get back up, and that didn't work. You might try a social media initiative for your marketing that just doesn't resonate, and you don't get any value back for it. So there's hiccups. Nothing's a straight line. But if you have a plan and a passionate, driving sort of internal engine, and you invest in yourself. You know, you learn things, because the negative people are there. Often they're the closest, frankly, they're your friends and family. So you just have to have a thick skin, but also you need to be investing in yourself and learning from other people. And to be frank, you know, there's one particular person in my life who I don't see anymore because it was too hard. You know, it's just too negative, and you know, I'm not impervious. I haven't got that thick a skin. You know, so you know, you just have to move away from that, and then stick to investing in yourself, learning, voraciously, and being around people who do support you in your dreams. You know, and some of those are practical people, like accountants.
Yes.
I always found, certainly 20 years ago, that being friendly with the bank manager was a great idea. You know, because I lived in a small town in Cambridge, and we saw each other at soccer because I was the club captain and his kid played my team. So, you know, I don't know if I didn't send him off that much, you know, to swap with other players. But anyway, I digress. You think about that stuff when you're in a small town. But yeah, you just, you know, everything hurts.
Yes.
You've got to have courage. If you made the courageous decision to go into business for yourself, then you just need to keep that and keep going. Get some help on the way for the things you don't know, and continue to drive hard for why did you get in business? What's your aspirational goal? And I know it's easy to say you can put a Fiji photo on the fridge, but because everybody says that, it's something that's tangible for you. Why are you doing it? And for me, it was always something to do with my family.
Yes.
I think when a man has children, it triples his motivation in life at work, whatever he's doing. I see that all the time. Yeah. So figure that out for yourself and go hard.
Back yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.